Good morning. My name is David Williams from Australia, Canberra in particular. And this morning I'm talking to you about friendly villages and digital migrants. And this is based on my research into social capital. And this particular topic is looking at how many connections does a project manager need, particularly to be effective with their project. There are three main theories underpinning what I'm talking about today, and they are social capital, which is the study of norms and networks for facilitating collective actions for mutual benefit. Network theory, the study of how people and organisations and groups interact with one another. And social identity theory, which is about intergroup behaviour, and particularly about how they associate their identity within a group. Because belonging to a group gives actors a sense of social identity and improves their ability to leverage assets held by members of the group. So if that's the case, why don't project teams connect more? Because what's showing up is they're generally not very good at networking and connecting across the practice. So the second question is, should they have strong or weak ties in their networks? And then that leads us to the main question is, how many connections should a project manager have? So I'll start off with why they don't network. And the research is finding that the reason why they do network is to enhance legitimacy, prestige, recognition, fill gaps in knowledge, and understand, innovate, and transform. So the third and fourth one were expected. The first and second reasons were less expected, but that's sort of what's coming out within the interviews. But why don't they connect more? So the responses from the research is showing that there's a feeling that there's no need. But I'm concerned that this might be optimism bias, which is common in project managers, that they think that they can do the job without asking anybody. There's no opportunity or proximity within a network for them, and they claim that they're too busy. And I think that can be related to low networking skills or a lack of understanding about the value of networking, but that's yet to be tested. So the next question is, should they have strong or weak ties? This is based off a work by Mark Granovetter, who suggests that a person should have no more than 7 strong ties. And then that's a handful for people to actually deal with. But strong ties are really good for transferring tacit knowledge and really complex information, particularly around technical aspects, or even more so around human issues. But weak ties enable search for new information and supports innovation. So there's strengths and weaknesses with both strong and weak ties. So, but how many weak ties can someone have? So referring to Dunbar's number, if you're familiar with it, which the work around that sort of says you can have very close kin of 5 to 7 people, a super family of 15, a clan of 50, and Dunbar's number itself is 150. And the theory states that, and practice supports it, that you can't have any more than about 150 connections, or else it's just not able to be managed. But people will think that they've got a few more than that. So if you have a look at Facebook and other elements in social media, the average Facebook user has 239 friends. the average LinkedIn user has somewhere between 700 and 900 connections, depending on which piece of research or data that you actually look at. So that's quite considerable more than Dunbar's number for those. What the research is showing that project managers that we've interviewed so far in the study averaged 69 contacts. And that ranges between 1 and about 720, and quite a large standard deviation in there. So they've got, project managers have got nowhere near the same amount of contacts as other people. And you know, earlier we looked at why some of the reasons that is. So we're working on a hypothesis that the extent of the network for both strong and weak ties required for a successful project is actually relative to the project objective, because many of those projects that don't have many ties are still highly successful. But why is that? And the hypothesis promotes the idea that many projects don't need much in the way of contacts. So I'm looking at the model, the project objective model by Shenha, which looks at project success. And they have 4 project objectives or types of objectives in their model. And the first one is the standard project outputs, which is your time, cost, scope, quality. The second one is impact on the customer. The third is for business success. And the fourth type of project objective is building capability for the future. And these have 2 dimensions, one in time frame, long and short term, and the other one is on the focus, whether it's internal or external. So we can see that project with focused on outputs it's got very much an internal focus and probably doesn't need all that many contacts. But a project that's focused on external for as far as its business success and building capability probably needs a bit more. So I've put this model into a matrix to look like this. So we've got outcomes, success, impact, and building capability. And we've got the 2 axes there, either they're internally focused or externally focused, and short and long term. So and the reason why I've put this in, because there's very similarities here to some other research into social capital. And that's some research done by Gattel and Vidal, who did some interesting research on linking small businesses to success, depending on the sorts of relationships that they had. They found that small businesses that were very internally focused and didn't have a lot of contacts in their village were treated like outcasts and weren't successful. They could rise to a certain amount of success if they became well integrated and well known within their village. But then as those organisations, those companies grew, those little businesses grew, and they moved to larger cities, they quite easily became urban migrants, where they had a large number of say, commercial ties out there, but they weren't connected back into their community. But they found, surprisingly, that where they did have that network back into their community that they could draw on, and they had were well networked within the marketplace, that they became quite successful. So then Woolcock and Narayan built on that and applied Granovetter's model about strong and weak ties, and identified that those internally focused types of businesses who focused on their strong ties and were communal driven. And the ones that moved into towards the cities really relied more on their weak ties or bridging ties and were externally focused. So if we take this model and we play with it a bit, what we can do is overlay that social capital dimensions model on our project objective matrix, because our project objectives is both internally and externally focused, the same as our model for social capital. So instead of having poor villagers and outcasts, urban migrants, for projects, we can call them patriotic gangs, because they're internally focused. They're usually quite defensive. They're focused on just getting the job done. Often don't have a lot of contacts in the broader organisation or even externally. Then you have your friendly villages, which are really a network within your organisation that are broadly connected internally and have strong ties internally, but not externally. We then have our digital migrants, as I call them, and that's those projects that are focused externally, quite often full of contractors, but not much in the way of internal ties. And then you have your network tribe, which is that type of project which is both connected internally and externally, and is highly effective in introducing innovation into an organisation through its project. So when your patriotic gangs and that have low number of ties, but your network tribe has a high number of ties, both strong and weak. So this model also aligns with Quinn Rohrbaugh's model on organisational culture, which is I quite like. It's also internally focused or externally, and rather than short and long term, it's looking at the vertical axis of being flexible and controlled, which is similar. So in our hierarchy here, this is very much the type of culture we expect of patriotic gangs. It's usually got a leader, it's tight-knit, and they're patriotic to one another. You then have your clan or your villages who are looking after your village and are focused internally on doing a project that actually assists the organisation. Your digital migrants are externally focused, are very much market driven, and your network tribe operates more like an adhocracy, focused externally and with high flexibility. So it's interesting to see how these models align with one another and start to give us an idea about, well, then how many people do we need for these particular types of projects based on their culture and particularly their objective. So for our patriotic gangs, internally focused, looking at just achieving project outcomes, probably don't need much in the way of strong or weak ties. 2 to 3 internal strong ties and maybe some external weak ties. In fact, I've had projects that have got absolutely identified far less weak ties than that. But in fact, I think most of the ties that they do have, which are weak, they just don't realise they do have. And you can see how this starts to fit in with Dunbar's number and that particular model about, this is sort of really focused about the kin and those tight networks that they actually have. Then you have your friendly villages who are looking at business success. Again, internally focused. They probably have a broader range of strong ties internally and some external weak ties. And then you have your externally focused digital migrants, where they're looking at the impact on the customer, spending a lot of time focused externally to what the customer thinks about the particular product or the project that they're working on. And quite often have strong external ties, particularly say to key customers, and can have a large number of weak ties. And, if we take Dunbar's number, it might be up to 145 possibly. And then you have your network tribe, which is building capability for the future and innovating with a mix of strong ties that are internal and external, and a large number of weak ties, probably external. So that's what it's sort of showing up as, those sorts of numbers. And to establish the strong ties, project teams need to acquire complex knowledge or fragmented information. That's the need that they have to go out and establish those strong ties. So with those gangs, they probably don't need that much in the way of knowledge or fragmented information. So they don't have that much need for those particular strong ties, probably just a few. Project teams, to get strong ties, need a shared objective. They need trust. They need proximity, so they've got to be relatively close to one another with their network. They need certainty on what they're doing, and they still need that capability to combine the knowledge. So when they go out and network on these strong ties, you still need to be able to work out what you're doing, what knowledge you do need or fragmented information, and how to bring that back into your project and use it. Now, to establish weak ties, project teams need something slightly different. They need those structural holes to appear. So where there is a gap in the knowledge that they require to run the project, and they need centrality within a closed network. So closed networks are really effective because they've built up that culture, and the more central you are within a project, the more effective you are in leveraging it. So this is some of the network theory that's coming out. And you don't need trust for weak ties, because if you're in a closed network and you're relatively central, you're likely to have shared identity. And this comes back to the identity theorem. And if you've got that shared identity, trust is implicit in the network. And there's plenty of case studies which reinforce and demonstrate this. So don't need to build trust, it's implicit, and you can just lean on people on your network to help you out. But you do need opportunity and proximity within the network, as well as being central. And again, you need that capability to combine that information. So what information do you need out there from the network, or relatively simple knowledge? What are you going to do when you get it, and how are you going to disseminate or use it back into your project team? So in summary, the number of friends, I claim, depends on your project objective. 4 to 5 strong ties is really effective, but it's also a lot of work connecting those sorts of people. But quite often they're usually embedded or connected to your project anyway. Dunbar's number 150 is just of weak ties. Is just a massive overhead. You can have those connections, but it's still a little bit of work to keep in contact or for a network on that. So by far a more effective way is actually to have 2 or 3 networks, which may have 150 or even more people. And connecting into the network rather than 150 individuals is a far more effective way to be able to leverage off those connections that you have and make good value of it. But to do that, what you need is you need to actually identify the structural holes. So what are the gaps that you need to run your project? You need to participate in networks with high closure. So you just can't be, what we call, just sort of hanging on the side, a lurker within a network. You actually have to be engaged in there, and particularly in networks that have high closure. So things that are a little bit clubby, a little bit hard to get into, that have high closure are far more effective for sharing knowledge and information. You also need to be central in that network. And you can do that by identifying, targeting key actors and building prestige within the network. And quite often that's involved in getting involved in running the community or the network that you're involved in. And of course, you need that capacity to integrate your external knowledge and information into your project. So having 150-week ties really is not really required if you're well embedded into a network. So here's an example. I've got 4 projects here: the yellow, white, blue, and gold projects, and they're sort of loosely connected into a network. Now, if I've got my white project, what's the easiest way that I can actually build social capital within that network, say through the addition of one connection? Now, you might think that connecting to, if Ed connects to Carolyn, that connects the network a fair bit. But actually, the best thing to do is for Ed to connect to Julie, because Julie is highly central in the network, and by connecting to her, Ed increases his centrality significantly, because Julie already has 5 connections and Carolyn only has 2. So Ed becomes far more central in the organisation. The other project team members are connected into other parts of the network, and we don't have duplications there. So that's really improving the centrality and the effectiveness of my white project. So I hope this has been of interest for the viewers or the participants in the conference, and I look forward to discussing my research with you on Friday. Thank you.